I want to tell you something about being invisible. Not the dramatic kind, not the kind where someone looks through you at a party or forgets your name. The other kind. The kind that builds slowly over 40 years. The kind where you are so consistently, so reliably present, cooking, fixing, paying, showing up, that the people around you stop registering you as a person at all. You become furniture. Useful, unnoticed, assumed. That was me. Eleanor Marsh, 64 years old, Savannah, Georgia. Former nursing administrator, mother of 2, grandmother of 3. The woman who held everything together for so long that everyone forgot she was the one holding it. Before I tell you what my children did, I need to know who's in the room with me right now. Drop your city in the comments. Whether you're in Georgia, California, New York, or anywhere in between, tell me where you're watching from. Because this story isn't just mine. I know that. And I'm glad you found it today. Now, my son Preston had power of attorney. My daughter Claudia had access to my savings account. I added her 3 years ago when my heart started giving me trouble. Just in case, I told myself. She's my daughter. That's what you do. My son-in-law Derek had ideas. Derek always had ideas. What none of them had was any idea what was inside the filing cabinet in my bedroom closet. The gray one, 4 drawers, combination lock I've had since 1987. I worked as a nursing administrator for 22 years. In that job, you document everything. Every decision, every discrepancy, every conversation that felt slightly wrong. You document it because someday, the documentation is the only thing standing between order and chaos. Old habits. I retired 8 years ago, but I never stopped documenting. And my children, who looked at me and saw a quiet older woman who made good pot roast and forgot things sometimes and mostly just wanted to see her grandchildren, they had been making plans, big ones, for years, without once stopping to wonder whether I had noticed. I had noticed everything. This is the story of what was in that filing cabinet and what happened the day I finally opened it in front of the people who thought they had already won. It started with my heart. January 14th, a Tuesday. I'd been having what I thought was indigestion for 3 days. Classic denial. I spent 22 years watching patients do exactly the same thing, and here I was doing it myself. On the 3rd day, I drove myself to Savannah Memorial. Cardiac event. Moderate. They kept me for 6 days. My neighbor Carol came the first afternoon, brought flowers, held my hand, asked the nurses the right questions, because I'd coached her on what the right questions were years ago over coffee. My son Preston called on day 2. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. He asked how I was feeling. I said I'd been better. He said to keep me posted. He didn't come. Claudia texted, a string of heart emojis and a voice message saying she was so worried and the kids had school and Derek was traveling and she would try to get down as soon as she could. She didn't come either. On day 4, Carol told me she had called Preston to let him know I was being kept longer than expected. She told me this carefully, the way you tell someone something you're not sure they're ready to hear. She asked me something, Eleanor, she said, when I called him. I looked at her. She asked if you'd signed the house transfer documents before you went in. The room was very quiet. I've spent a lot of time with that sentence since then, turning it over, examining it the way you examine something under a microscope, looking for an interpretation that makes it less than what it is. I never found one. Her mother was in a hospital bed with a cardiac event, and his first question was about the house. I came home on a Thursday morning. Carol drove me. I remember the Spanish moss on the oaks along the highway looked particularly beautiful that day. I made a note of it. I was glad to be alive to see it. We turned onto my street, and there it was, a for sale sign in my front yard, a realtor's lockbox on my front door. And when I put my key in the lock, it didn't turn. I stood on that porch with my overnight bag at my feet and the January air on my face, and something inside me that I can only describe as a settling. Not breaking, settling. Like everything I had suspected but refused to fully believe had just quietly confirmed itself. And now I knew exactly what to do. Let me tell you about the filing cabinet. Gray steel, 4 drawers, a combination lock I set myself in 1987 when I first started my job at the hospital. The combination is my mother's birthday. Nobody alive knows that but me. When Preston and Claudia were growing up, they called it the boring cabinet. School reports, tax records, insurance documents, the kind of paperwork children roll their eyes at. That's what they thought was in it. They were right about some of it. What they didn't know was that 7 years ago, when Derek first started asking questions about the house that felt slightly wrong, I opened a new folder. I labeled it simply Observations. In it, I placed the following: a printed email from Derek to Preston, forwarded to me accidentally by Preston, who has never been particularly careful with technology, discussing the estimated market value of my property and what it would net after my passing. I was 61 years old and in excellent health at the time. I placed it in the folder, said nothing. 8 months later, Preston asked me very casually over Sunday dinner whether I'd ever considered adding him to the deed, just for simplicity, he said. Estate planning, he said. I've been reading about it, Mom, he said. I told him I'd think about it. I added a handwritten note to the folder. Date, time, exact words. The power of attorney request came 2 years after that. Preston framed it beautifully. Your heart, Mom, just to be safe. I'm your son. Who else would you trust? I signed it because I wanted to believe him, but I also photographed the document before I handed it over, added it to the folder, added a note. When Claudia asked to be added to the savings account, same year, 3 months later, I noticed the timing, added a note. When Derek mentioned twice at separate family gatherings to separate people, just loudly enough for me to hear, that I seemed to be getting forgetful, that he was worried, that someone really should be keeping an eye on things, I added 2 notes. 7 years of observations, 73 individual entries, dates, times, direct quotes wherever possible. My children thought I was just a quiet older woman who cooked pot roast and forgot things sometimes. They forgot who I was before I was their mother. I was never going to forget. Carol's kitchen smelled like coffee and cinnamon. She sat me down before I even asked, put a cup in front of me, didn't say anything for 2 full minutes. That's the thing about a real friend. They know when silence is the kindest language. Then she said, "Tell me what you need." 3 things. I told her 3 things. First, I needed to call an attorney. Not a family friend, not someone Preston knew, someone I found myself from scratch with no connection to anyone in my life. Carol handed me her laptop. I found Nora Page, Family and Estate Law, Savannah, 12 years in practice, reviews that used words like tenacious and thorough and does not back down. I called her office at 10:47 a.m. Her assistant put me through directly when I explained the situation in 2 sentences. Nora Page herself was on the line in 4 minutes. I liked her immediately. Second, I needed to call my bank. I called the branch manager, a woman named Sandra, who had processed my deposits for 11 years and knew my voice. I told her I had reason to believe unauthorized transactions had occurred on my savings account. I asked for a complete transaction history for the past 3 years. Sandra's voice went quiet in the careful way that told me she had already seen something she wished she hadn't. "Mrs. Marsh," she said, "can you come in today?" Third, I needed to call Frank Delgado. Frank was an investigative journalist at the Savannah Gazette. I'd met him at a hospital fundraiser 12 years ago. We'd stayed loosely in touch, Christmas cards, the occasional email. He was the kind of man who paid attention to things other people looked past. I called him last. He picked up on the second ring. "Eleanor Marsh," he said, like he was already expecting me. "It's been a long time." "It has," I said. "Frank, I have a story, and I have documentation." A pause. "What kind of documentation?" he asked. "The thorough kind," I said. Another pause. Longer. "When can you come in?" I looked at Carol across the kitchen table. She was already reaching for her car keys. "An hour," I said. By the time Preston's realtor was putting up the open house signs in my front yard, I was already 3 moves ahead. The bank meeting was the one that changed the temperature of everything. Sandra closed her office door, sat across from me, and placed a printed transaction summary on the desk between us. I read it slowly, the way I used to read incident reports, line by line, no skipping. Claudia had made her first withdrawal 11 months ago. Small, $400, the kind of amount you could dismiss as authorized, incidental. Then $600, then $900, then 2 separate withdrawals of $1,500 within the same month. 18 months of quiet, incremental withdrawals. Total removed, $41,200. I sat with that number. $41,000. Not all at once, which would have triggered alerts. In pieces. Patient, deliberate pieces. I thought about Claudia texting me heart emojis from wherever she was while I was in a hospital bed. I thought about the school play of my granddaughters I attended alone last spring because Claudia said they were busy. I thought about $41,000 leaving my account in 18 months while I made pot roast on Sundays and asked after everyone's week. "Mrs. Marsh," Sandra's voice was gentle, "are you all right?" "I'm fine," I said, and I meant it, because here was what Sandra didn't know. Here was what none of them knew. My savings account was not where I kept my money. It hadn't been for 6 years. When Derek first started asking those slightly wrong questions about the house, I'd quietly moved the majority of my assets, retirement accounts, a CD, a small investment portfolio my husband Gerald had started, and I had grown patiently for 30 years. Claudia had access to my savings account. She did not have access to anything that mattered. She had stolen $41,200 from a decoy. I hadn't planned it that way, not consciously, but some part of me, the part that spent 22 years watching how quickly circumstances could change, had always kept something back, something that was only mine, something nobody else had a key to. The way I kept that filing cabinet combination to myself. Old habit. Sandra filed the fraud report while I sat in her office. I thanked her. Then I walked out into the Savannah afternoon and called Nora Page. "How thorough is your documentation?" I said. 73 entries, 7 years. The silence on the other end was the most satisfying sound I had heard in a long time. I called Preston on a Friday afternoon. I told him I needed to see him, that there were some things to discuss regarding the house and the estate, that he should bring Claudia and Derek. I said it pleasantly, the way I always had, the way they expected. He said Saturday morning, 10 o'clock. I said that would be fine. I spent Friday evening at Carol's kitchen table with Nora Page, going through the folder one final time. Nora had brought her own additions, legal documentation of the power of attorney overreach, the fraudulent property listing, the real estate contract Preston had signed on a property he did not legally have the authority to sell while its owner was alive, competent, and present. "You understand," Nora said, "that when he walks in tomorrow, he will expect a grieving, confused mother." "I know exactly what he expects," I said. They arrived at 10:15. Preston first, his salesman smile, his good son energy he deployed like a tool. Claudia behind him, nervous in the way she'd always been nervous when something was about to be required of her. Derek last, hands in his pockets, the casual confidence of a man who had never once considered that the woman he was visiting had outmaneuvered him at every turn. They sat down at my dining room table. My dining room table, in my house, whose locks had been changed back by a locksmith I hired Thursday morning. I placed the filing cabinet on the table. Preston's smile flickered. "Mom, what is—" "I'm going to let Nora explain the first part, then we'll go through the folders together." Nora opened her briefcase. Derek's confidence left his face in one clean motion, like a light switching off. Claudia looked at Preston. Preston looked at the cabinet. He knew. In that moment, I watched him understand that whatever he thought he'd known about his mother, whatever version of me he'd constructed to make his plans feel safe, was wrong. I had not been the woman he thought I was. I had never been the woman he thought I was. He'd just never thought about me enough to find out. "Preston," I said quietly. He looked at me. "I want you to know something before Nora begins." A pause. "I love you. I have always loved you." Another pause. "And that has nothing to do with what happens next." Nora presented for 40 minutes. I watched their faces the entire time. Preston went through 4 distinct expressions: confidence, confusion, calculation, and finally a gray, flat stillness that I recognized as the face of a man whose exit routes have all been closed simultaneously. Derek tried twice to interject. Nora spoke over him both times without raising her voice or changing her expression. She had clearly done this before. Claudia cried. I had expected that. Claudia had always used tears the way other people used arguments. They came quickly and they were genuine, and they were also entirely beside the point. When Nora finished, I opened the first folder. 7 years of observations. I walked them through the highlights. The accidentally forwarded email from Derek discussing my property value. Preston looked at Derek. Derek looked at the table. The Sunday dinner conversation about adding Preston to the deed. Preston started to say something about context. I read back his exact words from my notes. He stopped. The power of attorney request, the timing, the documentation of every subsequent action taken under it that exceeded its legal scope. Claudia's withdrawals from my savings account, $41,200, transaction by transaction. Claudia's crying intensified. Mom, I know what you needed. I always knew what you needed. That was never the question. The question I read from the last page of my notes, the question Carol had relayed to me from my hospital bed, was Preston's first response upon learning his mother had suffered a cardiac event. I read it aloud. Did she sign the house transfer documents before she went in? The room went completely silent. Even Derek had nothing. Preston's jaw tightened. You don't understand the context. Preston, I closed the folder. I spent 22 years in a hospital. I have seen every version of a difficult conversation. I know what context looks like, and I know what this is. Frank Delgado was not in the room, but he had everything he needed. The Savannah Gazette story would run 6 weeks later. The headline would describe it as a case of elder financial exploitation by family members. 3 words in that headline would catch on, that particular quiet story, by family members. Those 3 words would reach further than any of us expected. I want to be honest with you about something. There is a version of this story where I tell you I felt powerful the whole time. that the clarity never wavered, that I walked through every moment like a woman who had all the answers and never once sat on the floor of Carol's bathroom and wept. That version would be a lie. The night after the confrontation, after Preston and Claudia and Derek had left, after Nora had packed up her briefcase, after Carol made soup I barely touched, I sat in my living room in the dark for a long time. I thought about Preston at 7 years old, the way he used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms and press his face against my arm. I thought about Claudia at 15, crying over a boy who didn't know she existed, and how I had held her and told her she was worth more than anyone who couldn't see her. I thought about the $41,000. I thought about the power of attorney. I thought about the hospital room, 6 days, and neither of them came. Here is the thing about discovering your children don't think of you as a person. The discovery doesn't hurt because it's surprising. It hurts because some part of you already knew. Some quiet, honest part of you had known for years and had chosen over and over and over again to make a different explanation, to find the context, to extend the benefit of the doubt one more time. Because the alternative, the true thing, was too heavy to carry and too ugly to look at directly. I sat in that dark living room and I let myself look at it. All of it, without softening it, without finding the context. My children had looked at me and seen a resource, not a woman, not a person with a history and a mind and a life that existed before they did. A resource. And the grief of that, the real grief, not the anger, not the legal maneuvering, but the pure human grief of it, that lived in me quietly for a long time. It still does sometimes. On Thursday mornings when Carol comes for coffee, I think about what it would have felt like if it were Claudia coming instead. And then I pour the coffee, and I choose to be here, fully here, in the life I built from what they left me. The legal outcomes took 8 months. Nora was methodical and entirely without mercy in the courtroom, which is exactly what you want from an attorney and not at all what you want from a dinner guest, which is why I kept those categories separate. Preston's real estate contract was voided. The power of attorney was revoked and formally challenged on grounds of exploitative misuse. The property listing was removed. The lockbox came off my door. My house was mine. Derek was named in a civil suit alongside Preston for conspiracy to commit financial elder abuse. Georgia has specific statutes on this. Nora knew every one of them. Derek's confidence, it turned out, had been entirely borrowed. He settled, quietly, quickly. Claudia's withdrawals resulted in a separate criminal filing, $41,200. The DA's office took the case the same week Frank's article ran. Claudia called me the night before her first court appearance. I answered. She asked me why I was doing this to her. I sat with that question for a moment. Claudia, I said, I'm not doing anything to you. This is the documentation of what you did. Those are different things. She cried. I listened. When she finished, I said, I hope you get a good attorney. I mean that. And then I said goodnight. Frank's article ran on a Tuesday morning. By Thursday, it had been picked up by 3 regional outlets. By the following Monday, it was in the national conversation, not loudly, but persistently. The phrase elder financial abuse by family appeared in 11 subsequent articles that month across the country. I received 47 letters. From women who had been through something similar, from women who were in the middle of it, from women who were watching it begin and didn't know what to do. I read back to every one. I wrote back to as many as I could. One letter was from a woman in Portland who was 81 years old and had been trying to explain to her family for 2 years that she was not confused, not forgetful, not ready to be managed. I wrote back to her first. I told her to start a folder, label it Observations, document everything, date, time, exact words, and find an attorney who uses the word tenacious in their reviews. I sold the house 8 months after the legal case closed. Not because I was forced to, not because it held too many bad memories. It held 40 years of mostly good ones, and I chose to remember them that way. I sold it because I wanted something that was entirely mine, chosen by me, built around exactly the life I wanted and nothing else. I found a cottage 2 streets from the ocean, small, a garden in the back that needed work, a kitchen with good light. I moved in on a Tuesday in October. Carol helped me carry boxes. We ordered pizza and sat on the back step and watched the sky go dark over the marsh. And she said, "You seem different, Eleanor." "Different how?" I asked. She thought about it. "Like you took up the right amount of space," she said. "Finally." Preston and I speak occasionally, briefly, about the grandchildren because they are innocent in all of this and always will be. It is not warm, but it is civil. That is what I can give. Claudia completed her legal process. She is rebuilding her life. I pray for her the way you pray for someone you love from a very safe distance. I am 65 years old. I wake up every morning in a cottage by the ocean, and the first thought in my head belongs entirely to me. There is a quote I read once, years ago, before any of this, that I dismissed at the time as too cynical to take seriously. Ann Landers wrote it. She said, "At age 20, we worry about what others think of us. At age 40, we don't care what they think of us. At age 60, we discover they haven't been thinking of us at all." I used to find that sad. I don't anymore. Because here is what Ann Landers didn't say, what I would add from the other side of it. At age 64, standing on the porch of your own house with a changed lock and an overnight bag at your feet, you discover something even more important. You discover what you think of yourself. And if you have been paying attention, if you have been documenting and watching and quietly building, what you find might surprise you. It surprised me. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been made to feel invisible by the people who should have seen you clearest? Drop it in the comments. This is a safe room. What part of Eleanor's story hit you hardest? The hospital room? The filing cabinet? The moment Claudia asked why I was doing this to her? Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Right now, you know who they are. Subscribe if this community is where you belong. Like this video if Eleanor's story gave you something to carry. I'm Eleanor Marsh. I'm 65 years old, and I have never, not once, taken up the wrong amount of space. Not anymore.